Immigration is the fabric of our nation. Waves of immigration began in the colonial era and have continued into the present day. Please join us now for this important and timely edition of What's at Stake? Immigration. Hello and welcome to a Free Speech TV and Manhattan Neighborhood Network Town Hall Special. I'm Francesca Maxime, and I am excited to bring you an esteemed panel of experts who can help us cut right through the noise and get to the issues that impact all of us. Today, we are coming to you right from the heart of New York City in East Harlem, known as El Barrio, from the facilities of Manhattan Neighborhood Network. In 2017, with a new president that campaigned on reining in immigration and shaking up the established democratic system in favor of a more populist agenda, many immigrants, both legal and undocumented, are quite worried about the future. With talk of bans, walls, and deportations, what do the current administration's new policies even mean for New York City and for our country as a whole? And what does a Trump presidency mean for some of our most vulnerable communities? Well, before I introduce our first panel of experts, let's take a look at this brief report about a young Yemeni activist named Bushra and her journey to seek asylum for not only herself, but also to bring her family here.
Anyone who is here physically in the United States, whether you're a citizen or not, has rights. Due to fear, hostility, people tend to lash out at those who are different from themselves. I myself, if I had been born 18 years earlier, might not be here because my father would not have been able to come because of the Chinese Exclusion Act.
My name is Bushra. I'm from Yemen. I'm from Sana'a. I came here in January 2016, and in May I decided to seek for asylum. I lost my dad 4 weeks ago because there is no medicine in Yemen, and I'm trying so hard to get my mom and to hear my sisters. Of course, after Trump, he stopped all the applications, all the petitions that we were like, we want our family to be safe and united. And he's just making family apart.
I am undocumented. I am undocumented. And I have DACA.
It's like he and the persons that are around him. It's like they're like taking away all this stuff, liberties and rights. So that's not correct.
Everybody has a chance to be in this country because this country is not white people. This country is from everybody, especially the immigrants.
I think just the specter of raids or roaming groups of law enforcement officials searching the streets for people they suspect may be undocumented sends a chill, I think, down every American's spine.
They talk about 3 million criminal deportations. There's only 800,000 people with criminal convictions in the undocumented community. Where is President Trump pulling the 2.2 million other people from? He said a lot of things, and they have terrible impacts on our community. And if we are talking about a democratic process, the idea that we're stripping green cards and visas from people while they're in the air and detaining them when they land is unconstitutional. It's undemocratic.
You can't do anything. You just can't do anything. When you know your parents could, anything bad happen to them, you live in a full anxiety. Like my phone, I can't keep it silent. I can't think about anything, just going on Facebook and check what's the news and, oh my God, where did they bomb today? Or do they have water? Do they have electricity? What did they eat?
I think historians will tell us that in the United States, there is almost a fairly predictable cycle, a wave of hostility against immigrants. In the 1890s, it might have been against the Chinese and the Irish immigrants. 30 years later, it could have been Southern and Eastern Europeans. It it seems to demonstrate itself regularly, especially when in hard times people are acting somewhat out of fear.
You know, Trump is basically playing on the fears of the people that voted him into power, and he's carrying out his promises.
My father came here from the West Indies, as well as my parents, and as well as my mother and my grandparents. So I grew up in an immigrant household.
It's so hard to build a new house. It's so hard to build a new home. Exactly. That's what I'm fighting for the last year. I was trying to build a home that I always had a stable home, that I never moved in. I never moved from my house. Never, never. If you come from a war zone, it's worth it to do it. It's worth it to find a house and build it, and it's because it's not worth it to stay at a war zone that is not your fight.
We need people to be active, we need people to be critical, we need people to pay attention. We need people to take action, we need people to be accountable and hold others accountable, specifically right now about alternative facts.
Public interest legal organizations are being flooded with volunteers, lawyers, but it's not just lawyers. It could be any other professions or walks of life. Those who have some ability, which we all do, to reach out to your neighbors and say, do you agree with me on this? Let's make our voice heard.
Such a moving story and such important information. Now let's introduce our first round of panelists. We have Carl Lipscomb. He is a policy and legal manager for the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, also known as BAJI. BAJI is a national nonprofit organization that advocates on behalf of immigrants from Africa, the Caribbean, and Afro-Latino communities. Also with us, Nitha Khan. She is a multimedia journalist whose work has appeared in outlets such as the Huffington Post, the New York Daily News, and Essence magazine. She often covers issues impacting the Muslim community. We also have Kareem Awadallah. He is a journalist who was the youngest talk show host in the Egyptian national television market and dubbed the Prince of Egyptian talk shows. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. So let's jump right to it. After all that's happened over the last month or so, Kareem, let's start with you. What do you think about all of this?
The travel ban definitely is unconstitutional so far because it specifies, you're a country of immigrants, and then you have to make sure that there's no any discrimination based on the country of origin or the religion unless you have a certain reason for that. So when the first travel ban came, it specified certain countries that in a way that didn't sound constitutional. We're now yet to expect, we're waiting to see what will it be. Will it be still certain countries, certain nominated countries that will be banned, or there would be other criteria that accordingly they will ban based on it? We were speaking about it earlier, that can be, countries who don't speak English, countries who don't have English.
Sure, the
so
criteria may change.
Played around.
It's pretty fluid. Nitha, what do you think that the protests and the, sort of resistance, if you will, had impact? What kind of an impact did it have?
Well, they had a huge impact. Actually, the protests, which, by the way, I thought were phenomenal because they were across the board. You saw people from every single race, background, religion, standing in unison with the Muslim community, coming out protesting at airports. You had young attorneys who were sitting on the floor, literally on their laptops on the floor of airports, filing briefs on behalf of immigrants, on behalf of refugees, people who were caught up in the process, whose visas, either they already had visas or green cards and were just caught up in this mix. Because remember, this wasn't disseminated properly, so there was no real clear-cut boundaries as to what was allowed and who would be allowed in and who was stopped. So there was just chaos. So you saw these protests and you saw this pushback and you saw the ACLU and attorneys from everywhere go to court and fight on behalf of the Muslim community. And it was beautiful because that's why we were able to stop implementation of this ban. And I think the Trump administration and the White House did this almost as a test case to see what they could get away with and how much pushback there was going to be. And now it's basically we're going to see how much of that can we sustain going forward? How much will people still continue to come out and protest and push back against this, in the second rollout now?
And Carl, we're talking obviously about the new administration, and there have been incidents including violent incidents that have occurred not by the administration, but by people, like in Kansas, for example, when we recently heard that there were 2 men who were shot, 1 killed, who are actually from India, but there's allegations that that person who fired those shots was saying, "Get out of my country," or "Stay away from my country." What do you think about the administration's reaction to what is often noted as a rise in what many deem to be hate crimes?
Yeah, I've been dumbfounded by why the administration hasn't come out to denounce hate crimes more strongly than it has. At best, they've issued tepid responses every time there's some sort of attack or some sort of violence at the hands of vigilantes, but they just haven't done enough. And it's unclear why. I don't know if they're trying to pander to those elements within our society that actually perpetrate violence, or if they believe that they will lose political points from their supporters if they come out in defense of communities that are really victimized by these vigilantes.
But of course, we know that although it has been talked about as a Muslim ban, it's also been termed a travel ban. Prim, is it actually a Muslim ban?
Well, so far it's only Muslims who are banned from the United States based on this executive order, only Muslim countries. One of the things, Donald Trump recently has been on TV and he was saying, "I'll give myself A for whatever and I give myself C for communication." It was interesting to watch, but at least he understands that the way he communicates his messages to the people is not really working as good as it should. Again, when we're speaking about the travel ban, when they said the rationale behind it, it can make sense. Again, not that I'm vouching for it or I'm not supporting it, but when you say I'm stopping these people from coming to the United States because 1, 2, 3, so people can understand that. However, the way he conveyed the travel ban in the beginning, and I think that's the reason he chose to do a travel ban, just for the reality TV propaganda thing. That is, we're banning Muslims from coming, we're saving the United States. That's the main goal, because whoever is thinking that banning people coming, like the people who did the 9/11 attack or who would want to do any terrorist attack in the United States, if you think they are not as smart, I mean, they would not come with a Yemeni passport. The person who would come and do that most probably would be from European descent with blue eyes and a passport from Sweden, for instance. So they are much too smart than something like that will stop them. You're only alienating others. That can be your defense mechanism against the link between you and the radical.
Sure,
And I'm sorry, I was just going to say, and how the ACLU attorneys argued themselves. They were like, you don't have to discriminate against an entire group of people in order to discriminate against that group. Like, not all Muslims need to be banned in order to show that, yes, you're banning Muslims. And remember, in the initial rollout, there was a caveat that said that if you're a minority religion in, predominantly, where your religion is a minority in that country, then you're allowed in, basically saying like Christian minorities in those Muslim countries are allowed in. So in other words, this was blatantly a Muslim ban. And when they try to spin it as something else, I just think is absolutely insulting.
Sure. We also know that, of course, here in the United States, and particularly here in New York City, we have people represented from all around the world. We have Little Syria, we have Little Egypt, we have a lot of communities here in New York City. So let me start with you, Carl. Why do you think that immigrant populations from Asia, Africa, the Caribbean, and also elsewhere are so often left out of the conversation?
Yeah, I think there are several factors. One, I think there's the media. Oftentimes when immigration is discussed within the media, when the media portrays immigrants, the face of the immigrant that's portrayed is rarely that of a black person or an Asian person. It's often a Latino immigrant. Similarly, when political leaders discuss immigration as an issue, it's framed as primarily a Latino issue. So I think that there's a certain amount of erasure of non-Latino immigrants in the U.S. By both the media and our elected officials. I also think that even within advocacy communities, amongst immigration advocates, there's often a hesitancy to deny the fact that immigration is also an issue of race.
So, for example, Haiti.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. For example, Haiti. For decades, migrants from Haiti have been treated differently from other migrants from the Caribbean, in particular countries like the Dominican Republic and Cuba. So I think that there's definitely the media and political leaders, but immigration advocates share some of the blame.
Now, do you think that there are some specific challenges, if you will, that these communities face that other communities don't face? Nida, I'll go to you.
Yeah, I think a lot of, if you look at Asian immigrants, and we can say this for Caribbean and African as well too, they tend to be newer. So it's that conflux of trying to assimilate. And when you don't have, let's say you're the first of your family to come here, right? You have to pretty much learn everything on your own, so you don't have those mechanisms in place. You don't necessarily always have those communities everywhere all across the country to help you assimilate into society. So a lot of those challenges are unique to those communities, and they're not covered enough too. And then I think, like, as far as the Asian, sometimes they're portrayed as the model minority, right? And that actually does more damage in terms of division across the board, but also within that community too, because it's a very broad and diverse group, the Asian immigrants are, and they still suffer from unemployment and lack of educational opportunities. They're not all, successful entrepreneurs or doctors. It's a very diverse group. So I think we do a disservice when we do that.
Okay, and Karim, let me just jump to you. Because many African immigrants actually are Muslim as well, is there much solidarity, do you think, between these varying communities, especially in light of the proposed Muslim ban? Are people banding together, or is this yet another unfortunate opportunity that segregates people and separates people out?
I've been covering all of the protests happening since, actually before even Trump became the president, and what I can see is that it binds people together. Lots of people from even different, not only the Islamic sect, but like from different segments, religion, ethnicities. People have been binding together in one cause. One thing I'd like to highlight in here, and it's something that for some reason I have a problem with, is that people don't understand that even within the Muslim community there are different sects, there are different ideologies. For instance, I come from an Islamic country, and I had to leave because my life was in danger at some point, and the rise of radical Islam in Egypt threatened my life in a way or another, without going into further details. So I had to leave. So I left a very successful career, a very interesting lifestyle, in order to flee for my country. So when it comes to flee for my life, when it comes to how do we perceive Egyptians or Muslims or people coming from the Arab countries, how do we perceive the travel ban? How do we perceive the rules that need to be implemented in order to make sure that these ideologies don't infect the United States and don't come here? So you're afraid from them, but to me it's much more terrifying, because I lived with them. I've seen how do they live. So we want to make sure there's rules that they don't come here, but the travel ban is not the one.
Okay.
That's the cause.
That's all we have time for this particular segment. Thank you to my panel, Carl and Nida and Karim. We appreciate that, and let's take a quick break. We'll be right back.
For young women, be brave, be bold. Say what you feel, say what you think. Don't be afraid. You can do this. We're all in this together.
The main thing is just to respect yourself and know your worth in this place.
Making your voices heard, whatever that voice has to say, stand up and say it.
Stand strong and stand together, because without women, there would be no human race.
Welcome back to this Free Speech TV Manhattan Neighborhood Network Town Hall Special, Immigration, What's at Stake? Did you know that here in New York City, over 3 million residents are foreign-born immigrants? Well, please join me in welcoming Angela Fernandez. She is the Executive Director of the Northern Manhattan Coalition for Immigrant Rights and a board member of the New York Immigration Coalition. Angela, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So the first question I have is regarding this immigration, policy. It has shifted, obviously, with the new administration. But, for example, when President Obama was in office for 8 years, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Division, known as ICE, actually deported over 3 million undocumented immigrants, mostly convicted criminals. That, according to the Department of Homeland Security. And Trump and the White House claim that he will continue this policy and that there will not be mass deportations, but he is planning on hiring 10,000 additional ICE agents. We have also read reports of ICE agents detaining a woman who is seeking domestic abuse protection at a Texas courthouse, as well as a 26-year-old woman with a brain tumor who was removed from a Texas hospital and detained. So, first of all, does this sound only folks who are hardened criminals are going to be deported?
Okay, well, so first I'd actually like to add that under Obama and actually under past presidents, it's not only undocumented immigrants that get deported, it's also green card holders, legal permanent residents can get deported. And I'd actually like us to stop using the term hardened criminals because it removes the humanity of individuals. And once we start calling one group of people hardened criminals, then we're all going to be hardened criminals. When the reality is, of the statistics, is that the people that were deported under Obama, while he did prioritize individuals with criminal convictions, both undocumented and documented, the law is such. That is the law, and it's been like that for many, many, many years. What happened recently, and when I say recently, in the last 20 years, many people with misdemeanor minor convictions ended up becoming mandatorily detained and deported, and that was since 1996. So I really would want us to step away from using the term hardened criminals because they're not. And I think that now, in terms of what's happening today under this new administration, he is removing the priorities and now targeting everyone across the board. So that is something that is of great concern, and that is something that we actually are preparing ourselves as a community so that we're informed, we're empowered, and that we are ready and have to get ready to fight back.
Well, we're also told that Homeland Security is possibly expediting the process, meaning that the amount of time is going to be truncated, that people are even under review. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So there is something called expedited removal. It in the past was only applied to a small group of people. It would be immigrants that came in and had been in the country for 14 days or less. What the executive order does is that, what would happen is that they would be detained and deported immediately without a court hearing. What the executive orders spell out, and actually it spells out in more detail in the implementation memo that came out last Tuesday, what it spells out is that if you are undocumented and arrived here and have been living here for only 2 years or less, and if they stop you and identify that, you will be placed in expedited removal, which means that you will not have an opportunity to have your case heard in court. So what that means now is that as a community, if you're undocumented, you need to walk around with documentation that proves that you were in this country 3 years ago. Whether it be a paid cable bill, your rent, a hospital, proof of a hospital visit. So, I mean, that's just one small example of how this administration is allowing ideology to trump practicality and humanity.
Trump is left intact for now Obama's 2012 executive order on deferred action for childhood arrivals, better known as DACA, under which immigrants under 31 who came to the U.S. as kids can apply for deferred action, meaning the government will not deport them for 2 years and they can work legally. Obama's other executive order, the DAPA, or Deferred Action for Parents of Americans, is so far untouched by Trump, but it has been blocked by the courts and is still tied up in legal action. So how worried are you, Angela, that DACA and DAPA will in fact remain in effect, or could that change too?
So I'd like to also add that DACA actually applies for people that can prove that they arrived in this country before the age of 16. But it is true that you have to be under a certain age to actually even apply for it. But you have to prove that you came to this country before the age of 16 and before 2007. So the administration has said that he is not going to touch the executive order, the DACA executive order from 2012 that still continues. And the reason why is because he knows that the outcry would be so loud and well organized. Because the reason we have that executive order from 2012 is because the youth organized, did sit-ins in Obama's offices, and demanded this. So I'm just sharing this because protest and resistance, when you do it at the moment, you may not know what the effect will be, but here we have an example of that level of protest and organizing that is having an effect today and is stopping this particular president in his tracks.
Well, we have definitely seen the resistance and the persistence. So when it comes to Dreamers, what do you really think Trump might ultimately do, even if there is resistance? Because we have seen that at times one thing is said and another thing is actually done.
Mm-hmm. So what we know is that publicly he is not going to, what it seems right now, that he's not going to, for example, revoke the executive order, but the DACA executive order from 2012. But the executive orders that he signed, which are 3 of them, and I encourage everyone to go to the White House webpage and type in executive orders and see the ones that were the ones that were signed January 25th and January 27th. There are 3 of them related to immigration. Sit down, calmly read them. They will make you the hair on the back of your neck stand on end. And so what our concern there is that because it expands the discretion of immigration agents in deciding who to place in removal proceedings, while someone who has DACA could get ensnared in that, they need to quickly find an attorney and fight because they actually have a right to stay. But this is a completely different way of operating for us, and so anyway, that's what we see with with DACA, is that he could try and remove them one by one. But they actually have a right to stay and can fight for that right.
We know that a lot of people, frankly, are scared. There are a lot of people who are concerned about their lives, their status, their families, whether or not they are going to be separated. How can people act in solidarity with people that they know may be at risk?
There are many ways they can do that. Number one of the things that we're seeing in immigrant majority neighborhoods, people are not going shopping. They're not going to the bodegas. I had a meeting with bodega owners over the weekend. It was an emergency meeting. They said that their businesses are going to close because people are not coming and shopping. For those that have, number one, get to know your neighbors, offer accompanying them, or offer, if they just say, do you need a hand? I can run out and buy stuff for you. Shop in immigrant-owned small businesses because they are the core of what makes New York City great. So I think that getting to know your neighbors in a real way, in a meaningful way, in an authentic way, with compassion and with love, and then let them tell you what they need and what we need in that sense. Second, please join community-based organizations that do work with immigrant communities, even if they're not doing necessarily immigration legal work, but do work in immigrant communities, either donating, providing support that way, because the strain is big, the demand and the need is big.
So just manpower even.
Manpower, but keep in mind, in a small organization that receives any volunteers, you need a coordinator to coordinate the volunteers, their skills, matching up their skills with what the needs are. So it actually, I know for many organizations, it can be a little bit of a burden, but so all I ask is just to be patient and allow the small community-based organizations.
Whereas if you give donations, they're able to do with it
allow these organizations to hire a volunteer coordinator, that their job is to screen the volunteers, identify where their skills are and what the needs are of the organization. Or also, for example, our organization, we need to hire more attorneys. Because, I mean, this morning at 7:30, I went into our office and there were 50 people standing in line. And they're coming in, number one, either to get screened to see if they have some sort of immigration benefit, or number two, they're green card holders and they want to apply for citizenship, but they know, because we've been communicating this, that they have to be screened very carefully, because the immigration agents have a lot of discretion and we don't want to place anyone into the detention deportation machine apparatus that we have.
Angela, thank you so much for that and your insightful discussion. And clearly, folks can reach out to your group as well if they would like more information on the legal aspect of it.
Absolutely.
Thank you. All right, let us pause for a brief moment as we bring on our next panelists.
patriotism. It inspires passionate debate. It's worn like a badge of honor with good reason, because it means love and devotion for one's country. But what really makes up this country of ours? It's the people. To love America is to love all Americans. This year, patriotism shouldn't just be about pride of country. It should be about love. Love beyond age, sexuality, disability, race, religion, and other labels. Because love has no labels.
Welcome back to this Free Speech TV Manhattan Neighborhood Network special, A Town Hall, Immigration, What's at Stake? Well, when it comes to all of these issues and the changes surrounding immigration, it is hard to keep up with the legality of everything, and that's why we have some experts here to help us out. Joining us now are Stephanie Yanis from the Center for Constitutional Rights, where she works in the Government Misconduct Racial Justice Docket. And we also have Nabila Taj. She is an immigration attorney with Law at the Margins. Well, welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us. We know that you're working on behalf of a lot of folks here in this country who right now are feeling quite afraid. One of the biggest ways that people will resist and push back against Trump's new immigration policies will be through sanctuary cities. Simply put, a sanctuary city is where an undocumented immigrant can actually find refuge from deportation. According to the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, in the counties where most of the 11 million undocumented immigrants live, 69 sanctuary counties actually declined federal requests to hold arrestees in jail due to their immigration status, while 99 counties accepted that federal request. Meanwhile, more than 700 churches nationwide have stepped up to declare themselves places of asylum, as we were talking about earlier. And there is also a growing underground sanctuary movement, which Angela alluded to as well. So right here in New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio has vowed to go to court, actually, if federal funding is halted to sanctuary cities. What are the legal grounds for him to do so?
So one way that de Blasio can challenge the federal cuts is actually looking back to when states and the Republicans and the Tea Party were challenging the Affordable Care Act. And in that case, a number of provisions were upheld by the Supreme Court, but one provision was struck down. The one provision that was struck down was the ability of the federal government to stop funding federal money for Medicaid to states that decided not to expand their Medicare to poor people and to disabled people. Awful decision, but ironically, it can now be used for sanctuary cities to say that it is coercive and unconstitutional to block federal funding to states that do not wish to collaborate with ICE.
Interesting. And also, Nabila, we know that because Homeland Security funds could actually include money allocated to cities for counterterrorism, legally, can Trump actually pull this federal funding?
So it's based on, there is a Supreme Court decision in 2012 that says that the federal government cannot remove funds as a means of coercion if it's directly related to that. So I think if he does try to do that, there will be litigation.
And we know, obviously, that New York is a sanctuary city filled with immigrants. And we know that, in general, the federal agency, ICE, typically asks jails to hold inmates an extra 48 hours just so they can get a warrant to begin deportation proceedings if the person happens to be here illegally, and new policies that ICE could begin actually deporting people earlier before criminal proceedings are complete. What legal recourse would anyone who is undocumented have in this situation, if any, either one of you?
So I think that it's no better or no worse, right? Documented folks and immigrants have the right to a defense. Whether or not their criminal proceeding has taken place, in their immigration proceeding, they still have a right to defend themselves.
And how long do you think that, go ahead, you want to respond? Sure.
So, New York City has been stated that we're a sanctuary city and that, the police departments, law enforcement will not hold people. But even though when NYPD is arresting people on low-level offenses, those offenses like jumping a turnstile can still make you eligible for deportation. So even if NYPD is not holding you, they're putting you in that position.
So a very minor infraction. Well, how long could someone actually then be detained now?
So this is an area that I think folks did a bad job of not listening to directly impacted people and organizers and activists before the Trump administration, since the Obama administration and before. So folks can be detained and await their immigration proceeding for many, many months. There's actually a case currently at the Supreme Court called Jennings versus Rodriguez, in which the Ninth Circuit and the Second Circuit have held that if someone is detained for 6 months or more, that they are entitled to a bond hearing. The Obama administration actually didn't agree with that and challenged that, and that's what's pending at the court at the moment.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I mean, right now, I know New York, we have the Laura case that does allow a person who's mandatorily detained to have a hearing within 6 months. But again, that's not across the board, and that's why we're waiting to hear what Jennings is going to
Are
be.
there other rights that are afforded to undocumented immigrants that we should be aware of?
Absolutely. You have the right to an attorney, and you should demand one. The government will not provide it, but you should demand one. And you have the right to remain silent, which means you don't have to sign any forms that ICE is giving you before consulting an attorney.
Generally, if you are on the United States soil, you have constitutional rights, and the Constitution does apply to you, which means that undocumented folks and immigrants have the right to be free from discrimination, whether religious, whether racial. They have the right to not be unreasonably searched and seizured, right? So if you are in your home and ICE knocks on the door, unless they have a judicial warrant signed by a judge and they show it to you, you do not have to open the door no matter what they say. Oftentimes they'll say we have a deportation order, which is different from a judicial order signed by a judge. So yes, immigrants and undocumented folks do have constitutional rights.
And in your line of work, I mean, what are some of the cases that you've seen that have been successful, victorious, you know, that you are just sort of using as a boost at this time? And what are some of the ones that are really challenging for you?
So the first case that comes to mind is one of the first ones that I've done where my client had been trafficked for a majority of her life, put into sex work, and she had numerous convictions because of the sex work, because the laws are geared to penalize the sex workers and not the people who are pimping them out. So she had numerous convictions. She's a lawful permanent resident. She has 5 kids here. And they put her into removal proceedings to send her back to the Dominican Republic, where she had not been since she was 5 years old. She spent over 30 years in this country. And they came to her one day. She wanted to renew her green card. The ICE officers barged into her house at 5 a.m., took her in front of her children, and she was detained. And she was put into removal proceedings, and they wanted to send her back. We fought the case, and she got relief, and she's allowed to stay here. And now she's in the process of naturalizing.
Nice.
And then on the flip side, you know, I have another lawful permanent resident, so a person who has a green card. He's been here since he was 13. He's been here for over 50 years now. And he has several mental health issues that went undiagnosed until well into his 30s. And so for most of his life, he was self-medicating and relying on cocaine, and all of these drug abuse led to several convictions that also make him removable back to El Salvador, which is the highest homicide rate in the world right now.
Can you talk a little bit about that, how really people are often fleeing a egregious situation, whether it's Syria or where you just mentioned, anywhere where their life is at peril? A lot of folks aren't necessarily coming here for opportunity. Often they're just coming to save their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen that since the Obama administration, when a number of children from Central America were fleeing war and were stopped and put in detention for an exorbitant amount of time, and many of them sent back, right? So this is something that we've been dealing with for a long time. You know, at the Center for Constitutional Rights, we work a lot on abusive enforcement. We work a lot on the rights of prisoners and the rights of folks who are detained. And so we've done a lot of work around home raids, illegal home raids. We've done a lot of work around making sure that the government is transparent to the people on what procedures they're using. And one recent case that actually went up to the Supreme Court called Ziegler versus Abbasi, in which Muslim immigrants were being detained and abused simply because they were Muslim. And so the question for the court right now is whether high-ranking government officials can be held accountable for that. And so we can anticipate how that decision could answer questions about whether high-ranking ICE officials could be held accountable and potentially be sued for damages for abusive practices in detention.
Speaking of abusive practices, do you think that undocumented folks may be less inclined to report crimes that are either happening directly in relation to their immigration status or other crimes simply because they are less inclined to want to encounter any kind of police official?
Absolutely. Many of my clients ask me that question. You know, it's been shown that when immigrant communities are now afraid to reach out to police, reach out to law enforcement, when even to report a crime, they're afraid that, you know, they will be targeted. And that's the value of a sanctuary city, where a city is promising to limit its interaction with the federal government.
You know, I'd add that this idea that we are a sanctuary city is in fact that we do have some shields, but we are actually not a city that is safe for immigrants, in the sense that, one, the federal agents and ICE can still do their work in our city, right? But two, this idea of the first point of contact for most of our community members is local law enforcement. And so if we're thinking about ways in which we're protecting our communities, then we actually need to think about ways in which we're reducing aggressive policing in our communities that's actually putting people into the system that we're supposed to be protecting. And so as we talk about Mayor de Blasio and as we talk about New York as a sanctuary city, we need to make sure that we're actually resisting the notion that sanctuary cities as they are is the answer.
So based on the legal work that you each do, can you say what people can do for their friends and neighbors that they know are in peril and that they want to help?
Absolutely. Going off of Stephanie's last point, I think it's really important to organize and fight back against broken windows policing, which means, you know, it's this draconian policy of law enforcement arresting people for low-level offenses, which can, in the theory is that it'll prevent serious offenses, but it's proven wrong. And what it's doing, it's putting people at the risk of ICE deportation because of jumping a turnstile or selling counterfeit DVDs on the street. And I think really it's about shifting. If you want a sanctuary city, it's really about shifting into organizing.
Yeah.
Stephanie?
I second everything that Nabila said. I would add that a lot of the discourse around how can we support usually goes to lawyers, and I would encourage us to, in addition to supporting lawyers, to also support grassroots organizations that are consistently doing the work to the point where we are here talking about the humanity of undocumented folks and immigrants. It's because of the work of directly impacted people on the front line, as well as the organizers and activists. So thinking about groups like Baji, thinking about groups like Mi Gente, thinking about groups like Drum that are actively doing the work and supporting them.
Ladies, thank you so much for your work and for being with us here today to talk about this important issue. We are discussing immigration, what's at stake here, and I want everybody to hold tight because we're getting to the part where the audience gets to participate. We'll be right back.
Every time I hear the alarm bell go off in school, I think it's an air raid.
A lot of houses in our neighborhood have been destroyed. I like to close my ears and sing songs whenever the bombs come close.
I'm worried our new neighbors won't like us.
But I know it's all gonna be worth it. I just want my family to be safe. But these are not my words.
These are not my words.
These are not my words.
Welcome back to this Free Speech TV Manhattan Neighborhood Network special, Immigration, What's at Stake. We wanted to let you know that one of the things that has changed over the course of his presidency so far is that President Trump now says that he is open to a broader immigration policy that would grant legal status to folks who have not committed serious crimes. And we wanted to, before we get to our audience questions and our talk and broader discussion about immigration, just go back to our panel briefly and just please share your thoughts on what President Trump is now saying.
So the devil's in the details. What we want to make sure is that whatever proposal is provided, it doesn't mean that it limits future immigrants from becoming U.S. citizens. And so we have to be very careful about this and make sure that we don't create a legal structure that then bars people from becoming U.S. citizens.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add is that in making this announcement, what the president really is doing is creating a framework that pits good immigrants against quote-unquote bad immigrants. And bad immigrants are any immigrants that have had any sort of criminal contact. Under this administration and the Obama administration, serious crimes included possession of low amounts of marijuana, hopping subway turnstiles, selling CDs on the street. So when this president talks about going after those that have committed serious crimes, this is who he's talking about. You know, those that are, you know, that have committed offenses that, by and large, the general public believes should be decriminalized.
We're going to take our first question. Please state your name and ask your question to the panel.
First of all, thank you very much. And my name is Fatima Velázquez, and I represent the Ecuadorian integration in Nuestra Gente TV. And now that DACA is, President Trump has said that it will not be touched, knowing that it could be also be detained and be deported. I mean, it is prudent for them to, all those people that right now are pending, to be able to do that.
That's a very, very good question. And as soon as the president won the election, that is the first thing that different community-based organizations that do the frontline legal services work sat down and met to discuss. So what we have advised people is that we need to look at it on a case-by-case basis. So if you are right now undocumented, but you are eligible to apply for DACA, then you need to speak to either an immigration attorney or a community-based grassroots organization like ours, where we can sit down and look specifically at your history and explain to you the risks with this administration, number one. Number two, if you already have DACA and you need to go and renew, by all means go renew, because you're already in the USCIS system. You don't want to fall out of status, and so go ahead and renew.
Yes, my name is Sekou Branch from the African Poetry Theater in Queens, New York, which we have a huge immigrant population, so it was a concern. But my question is concerning the ban on Muslims and the travel ban. From my knowledge, I know that China and Africa have the largest Muslim populations. So why is it that Arabs and Yemenis are being profiled? What do you think the real reason is?
Well, if you're speaking about Muslim ban, people automatically would think about banning Afghanistan and Pakistan, all these countries where you literally have been in war with, but it wasn't part of that. So it has another calculations, I would say. As for how do we feel as people coming from a Muslim country, it's strange because usually we do not think the way you think we think.
that kind of goes for just about everything, right? It's hard to read somebody's mind.
Usually the case. One, terms, and on media there has been lots of wars and debates about shall we use this word or not. Terms like radical religion or political Islam are words we use them loosely. So we don't feel offended if we use them, because in America people have been in wars for a long time. Shall we use that? Shall we not use that? It's offensive. No, that's fine. What's not fine is that you say all Muslims are radical Islam, all Muslims, all people coming from this area are radical Islam, belonging to this ideology. This is wrong, because it's not the case. On the other hand, when it comes to how do people coming from my region to the United States, I would, there's different segments, different ideologies, but mainly I can divide them easily into two. One, people who are coming here just for the financial reasons, but they don't blend much with the society and they bring their ideology and religious beliefs, which is one segment. The majority of the people coming from my region coming here to enjoy the freedom of speech, enjoy the liberty, enjoy the high quality education. And these people, and I would claim I belong to this band, they are much more scared of adapting or having the radical ideology infecting the fabric of the United States. And that's for a reason, because again, to you, I know it's a scary thing, but end of the day, it's just a bedtime story for you. You watch it on CNN, you watch it, I mean, I know, don't take it lightly, but end of the day, you just watch it from, it's a fish tank view. You don't see them, you don't feel them, you just see that they are horrible, but then before you sleep, you flip the page and you all live happily ever after. We lived with them. We have seen them affecting. Again, I left a very successful career as a talk show host and a very nice life because my life was in danger more than 4 times.
Certainly a lot of people are looking to come to America for opportunity. Carl, you look like you want to respond.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in. I think that, I think I'd like to reframe the question a bit. I don't think this is about radical versus non-radical Islam. I think that this is really about a government that's xenophobic and racist, that's targeting Muslims of all traditions. I think that the term radical Islam is something that was quite frankly manufactured in order to vilify a large group of people, and that's evidenced by the fact that here in the U.S. We have Christian sects.
I was about to say
that are, Christian sects that are very orthodox, but they're not considered radical. So I think that, that should, we have to, those that support immigrants have to really start to push back against that frame. And then, sorry, just to respond to the question very quickly, one thing, the Muslim ban actually applied to 3 African countries as well, Libya, Somalia, and Sudan. So Africans weren't left out of the equation.
Yeah.
I just want to say one thing, just to comment on it. It wasn't manufactured. It's a term that has been used, and we have had problems with radical Islam. I'm a Muslim. I come from a Muslim country, and this is a problem we identify that we have.
Sure.
So you cannot come and say it's not something that we have. We know it's a problem we have in the ideology.
But I think to his point, we have a senior advisor, Bannon, who has said very clearly and agrees with a particular way of thinking that the America that is great is the Judeo-Christian America, and that any Muslim that comes in, radical or not, is going to be a danger to what America is. And that is very, very dangerous.
Okay.
Now that's wrong.
Angela,
that's
thank
scary.
you.
Yes, I agree with you.
My name is Liz Canner, and I'm asking a very pragmatic question. I feel like you were having such an important conversation, and this is sort of going off in another direction. But I'm very curious, if I live in a city or town in the United States, and it's not a sanctuary city, how can I put pressure on my politicians to make it into a sanctuary city? And are there organizations that can help me do that? And also, if I would like to participate in the Underground Railroad and I'm not connected, how does one get connected into that?
Stephanie, you want to give that a shot?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. I think to your point about, how can cities become a sanctuary city, right? So at least in New York, what a sanctuary city actually is under federal law, local law enforcement does not have to corroborate or collaborate with ICE officials, which means if someone is detained in local law enforcement in the jail, they don't have to turn over that person to ICE. They don't have to detain that person until ICE gets a judicial warrant to take them. And so when you're lobbying folks, that's one way in which you can lobby for a sanctuary city is do not collaborate with ICE. Another way is in New York, we've established the idea that you have the right to an immigration attorney in New York City in immigration proceedings. So that's something else that can be worked towards. In terms of organizations, I would look to local grassroots organizations in whatever area you are looking to, and definitely contact folks who have been doing this work, like Baji, like Angela's organization, like CCR, and like Mi Gente, which is a national Latinx organizing hub.
Stephanie, thank you. Anyone else want to add to that, Angela? Or
I think that you may want to actually plug in with the indivisible groups that are popping up in the different parts of the state and propose that as an idea. Maybe go in, finding that grassroots group, bring them to the indivisible meeting so they can talk and explain about the successes that we have had actually with local campaigns, keeping ICE away from local police and our corrections facilities. And I think then you can use the strategies of the letter writing, the calls, the in-person meetings that Indivisible is teaching folks and connect it to the actual content that we're discussing.
My name is Jay Harris. This is really for any of you. There have been a number of executive orders signed that have to do with immigration beyond the Muslim ban. And I just wonder if you could speak to some of those and the implications.
You want to start? And then
I
we
can
could probably
start.
Go down the line.
There's a lot.
So the week of January 22nd, the president signed 3 executive orders pertaining to immigration. We've talked about the Muslim ban order. There were 2 additional orders. The first order was the order that called for the building of the wall at the southern border. It also called for hiring 5,000 new Border Patrol agents and reestablished a program called Secured Communities that encourages local law enforcement agencies, police departments, to collaborate with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The second order was the order that largely pertained to sanctuary cities. It set up a, some sort of a punishment, effectively, for cities that refuse to, cities and states that refuse to collaborate with the federal government to enforce immigration law. It also set out the administration's priorities for detention and deportation. And it laid out several of those. Most notably, this administration is now prioritizing any immigrant that has been charged with a criminal offense, even before they're convicted of such offense, or any individual that performs an act that could be charged as a criminal offense as well.
So, Angela, you want to?
It's really important to note. I mean, also, if you read the language, it's very polemical. The assumption is that immigrants are here committing crimes, and so they want to establish an office where U.S. citizens, and it says U.S. citizens haven't had a voice when they have been victimized by immigrants. So there's an office where a U.S. citizen can go and say, I was victimized criminally by an immigrant, which, by the way, statistically, it has shown over and over again that the immigrant population has lower levels of criminality. But in any case, that office gets created, and then every month they'll publish a list of the countries from which these criminals come from that have committed crimes against U.S. citizens, their status, and the crime. And that's very dangerous, because what it'll do is invite vigilante justice. It also says that the right to privacy for immigrants, they're removing that. Now, we don't know exactly what that means. We really hope that it doesn't mean they're going to list the names as well. Right. And then a second piece around the sanctuary cities is that if a city says they're not going to be participating as a sanctuary, and they are going to release someone that's been arrested for a broken taillight, and the local police want to use their discretion. I mean, the local police know what their community is. So this doesn't make sense for us to, allow them to be have a detainer placed on them and then removed or moved to deportation proceedings. If a municipality decides to do that, they need to list the person they've released, their status, the country they're from, and they're going to publish that on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I was just going to add that the reason that they're publishing this list is precisely back to Angela's point that immigrants actually commit less crime than native-born folks. And so they're actually trying to criminalize because the numbers don't add up to what's actually the rhetoric that the president is saying. But then I also wanted to say that a number of executive orders that are not so much in the spotlight is a number of executive orders that have to do with local law enforcement and the ramping up of, criminalizing dissent. How we criminalize how folks, resist to police, and all of these things which actually intersect with a lot of immigrants and a lot of black immigrants, right? Like we think of Amadou Diallo, who was murdered by a local police officer who's an immigrant. And so as we think about this, we also have to think about how these executive orders intersect with each other to criminalize our communities.
I just want to say that we should focus a little more about what to ask for. Like now he's vouching for building the wall, deporting immigrants. So I think we need to change the strategy in a way. So, okay, if you're building the wall, at least allow equal opportunity for immigrants from all over the world. So our strategy has to be different in a way. We should not ask for repealing his decisions, but at least negotiate for something that goes along.
Panel.
Because we have a long history of negotiating with these folks.
We can do something that I know another talk show host does called overtime amongst ourselves. But for you folks, we're going to have to leave it here. I want to thank my panel, Carl, Angela, Stephanie, and Krim, and everyone else who appeared. I want to thank our audience here as well for this, and our audience at home. We also want to invite you to really continue to engage this conversation. This has been a a Free Speech TV Manhattan Neighborhood Network production, a town hall special, and we want you to go online and talk about it. Hashtag What's at Stake. Thanks so much for joining us for this critical discussion of what is at stake: immigration. Good night.